Welcome back, everybody. You're watching Politico's AI Summit, and I'm here with János Delcker, our AI correspondent, who's going to introduce our next session, which is about the next frontier in technology. Over to you, János.
Thank you, Nick, and welcome back from Berlin. My name is still János Delcker. I'm still Politico's AI correspondent, and I will be moderating the next session in which we are turning our focus to the future. We're going to be asking, what is the next great frontier in artificial intelligence, and what are the limits, respectively, what should be the limits? And I'm very happy to have two panelists with me who are extremely qualified to talk about that. Both of them are trained as computer scientists, and yet in their day-to-day work, they're approaching the field from different angles, if you will, which makes our discussion today even more interesting. And without further ado, let me introduce them to you. We have Max Welling, who's the research chair in machine learning at the University of Amsterdam. Max also co-founded a university spin-off, which was acquired by Qualcomm in 2017. And since then, he has served as vice president for technologies at Qualcomm as well. And also with us here in my hometown, Berlin, which is now her hometown as well, Joanna Bryson, who last year joined the Hertie School as professor of ethics and technology. The Hertie School, for those who are not familiar with it, is a governance school, a public policy school. I think that's probably a fair way to describe it. So before we start with our discussion, we would like to hear from you, the audience, in our next audience poll. And the question we're asking you now is, when you think of the AI technology we might see in the coming decades, are you rather excited or worried, or equally excited and worried? And to finish up the housekeeping, I also want to remind everyone that you have the option to submit your questions via our Summit app. So if you go into the program, click on this panel, and then go into the Q&A section, that's where you can do it. And now, without further ado, let's dive right into it. And let me start by asking you, Joanna, when you think of artificial intelligence, what do you think is the next great frontier in the field over the coming years, over the coming decades, and what do you consider the most important issue to tackle?
Okay, well, thanks very much for having me. And actually, I've only been in Berlin since 1st of February, and I feel so fortunate to be here. And I think that's relevant to the question, actually, because when I think about the future of artificial intelligence, I think very much about as we get over the sort of gee whiz, lick no hands, we've got things that are almost human-like in all these different ways. When we start understanding what we really can do as we start enhancing our knowledge and how it impacts our lives, it doesn't change our lives as much as I think we expect. So one thing I personally am super excited about is when we go forward with this natural language processing that the colleague from Google was mentioning, to the point where we can really get sort of live translation in our ears, and we can support everybody speaking in their natural language, and their native language, like I have the good fortune to be able to do. But that's not going to suddenly make it so that we all understand each other's idioms and stories and that we all feel totally at home with every single other person. So I think there's going to be a refocusing on, what is it to be human? What are people for? And I'm extremely concerned right now. So in the near decades, the next 10 or 20 years, convincing people that people matter. So I'm worried that some governments right now think that because they are good at AI, that they are good at technology, then maybe it doesn't matter that they invest quite so much in healthcare as they used to. Things like that. On the other hand, on the longer term future, I think the really interesting challenges are actually going to be more humanist. Of course, obviously, I shouldn't mention, we have to change everything because of sustainability, because of moving the cities, because of the ocean levels rising. So we need to be more efficient at everything we do. I think AI is going to become more invisible. But in the meantime, we will be able to understand and predict almost everything we do as well. And that is going to be a new challenge for the humanities, how to keep people excited about their lives, about being human. When we understand we are apes that are good with algorithms, that's kind of what we do.
Well, then, everything I can do is pass on the question to the next ape who's good with algorithms, Max Welling. Same question to you to start the discussion, and then you please have the option to react to each other, because that's where we're particularly interested. But when you think of AI, what do you think is the next great frontier in the field over the coming years, the coming decades, and what issues do we need to tackle now because of that?
Yeah, I'll so thank you also, Janos, for having me on the show. I'm very honored to be here. So I'll just answer this question in a more technical way because that's my expertise. So I want to split the question into sort of three different components, and those are the three components which are crucial for artificial intelligence. The first one is compute. Of course, compute is on a Moore's law trajectory already since the 70s, which basically means there's exponential growth in compute power, so doubling every 2 years. But the problem is that the machine learning right now is not very power efficient. So we cannot keep scaling because at some point the energy bill will just simply become too large. And also, if you think of devices like a phone, at some point it will just become too hot. And so we will be going back to brains and study, how are brains doing this trick. So in brains, actually, people estimate that they're about 100,000 times more energy efficient than our best chips today. So there's still a lot to be learned. And of course, there's also new frontiers like quantum computing and optical computing, which will also play a big role. So the second component is data. And I already sort of heard Wasim at his opening speech talk about that we are actually going to change the paradigm in which sort of we collect data and we use data, which is now called sort of federated learning. And in federated learning, we basically we train our algorithms distributedly over many devices, and we don't collect it sort of centrally, which means that it can be done more privately. And then the last one is algorithms. So algorithms is the third component for the AI revolution, if you want. So right now, AI algorithms are extremely, inflexible. That you can train them on one particular domain, and you need a lot of data, and then you can do very well in this very restricted domain. But humans are far more flexible. You can train them on very small data sets. Humans can learn from very small data sets and then generalize to completely new environments and new contexts and apply the lessons learned. And so how we do this is not very well understood. You could think that people are, they have a power to imagine, so they can imagine futures and they can imagine, the results of their actions on their futures. And this is something that right now is not in our AI algorithms.
Okay. Thank you. That's fascinating. And this is actually, I would love to pick up one element from the first component that you mentioned, where you said, we need to actually go back to understand, as we talk about artificial intelligence, to understand how our brains work in the first place. And I would like to pass this question on to Joanna Bryson, who was also trained as a psychologist. How well do we actually understand that at this point in time, how our brains work?
Okay, I'll answer you quickly, and then I'll jump onto something else that Max just said. First of all, we're actually really good at understanding neuroscience. There's a lot of denial about this. It's amazing the progress that's been happening in the decades since I first did my behavioral science degree at Chicago in the 80s. Every day there's just great studies about this. And I think our defensiveness about what is it to be human, that we don't want to find out, that there's a demystifying way of thinking about this, stands in the way of our recognizing the progress that is being made in neuroscience. And I'm not saying, of course, there's more research to be done. There will always be more research to be done. But I think that we are making progress there. But I want to go back to this question. Are humans able to flexibly learn? Like, no, there's like entire spectra of light that we cannot see, right? There's all kinds of ways in which we're brittle too. We just don't think about those ways. Every species is constrained into a set of areas that sort of make sense for it. So, I mean, there is nothing more general than Bayes' law, which is the way that, the foundation of a lot of machine learning. I disagree. I disagree that it's about getting some one magic algorithm or better algorithm, or that we're going to find. If you look at the brain, here's something we know about the brain. The different regions of the brain have different architectures. They have different connectivities. They have different sorts of neurons. I mean, so different that a naive person could look at it and immediately say, wow, those are still neurons, right? They're totally, totally different architectures. And so I think that if we're thinking about the immediate present until the next 10 years, one of the revolutions will be getting away from all this thinking about single algorithms and thinking more of the systems approach to developing artificial intelligence and understanding the importance of, for a particular kind of intelligence, like human intelligence. That's what I was saying. We have the architecture of an ape, right? And so we have those kinds of goals and desires and the stuff we can see in the visual spectrum and all those sorts of things. And there's no particular reason for us to build AI exactly like that.
Well, okay, maybe I can respond to that for a minute. I do completely agree that there is a wide spectrum of AI, and human intelligence is only one kind of intelligence on that spectrum. But I do want to say that we cannot yet build systems that are nearly as good and flexible as humans. And let me give you one reason why we actually do need that. So imagine that we want a robot running around in our house, and we want this robot to help us with many tasks. Let's say we wanted to ask to do the dishes or fold our laundry, or all these kinds of things. It needs to understand what we are saying. We need to understand in what context we are saying. It needs the agility and the mobility to then execute on all these tasks. So there is clear use cases for AI to be as good and as humans and as flexible as humans, because we also will want to interact with these AIs in ways that are human-like. And it's true that there's many other ones, like a search engine, that is not human-like at all, and of course exceeds our abilities many times over.
Yeah, but that's what I'm disagreeing here, is about this idea that that's about flexibility. So again, what we think of as flexibility, now, yes, there's certainly room to be, for improvement in dexterity for robots that people could afford in their homes, if that's something we think is a practical application of our wealth. Maybe that's not the kind of in-home assistance we really need. But anyway, the point is that, yes, there are limits to what we can do in terms of manipulation with robots right now. But find a human that is flexible enough to understand all the languages that Google can answer questions in. Right? So it's not about flexibility. It's just about these particular domains that we care a lot about, and of course that we're best at. But it's not about that, oh, we don't understand, we don't have sufficiently general intelligence. There's nothing more general than Bayes' law. That's adequate for machine learning.
Yeah, but
what we have
Bayes'
is
law
that
is
we
not...
need to start, we're trying to build these more specialist capacities that primates have.
So I guess we disagree fundamentally here, but that's fine. We can agree to disagree. I mean, Bayes' law is not an intelligent system. It's one equation. And of course, you cannot just say that, having one equation will just build an intelligent system for you. And I also think, if you look at some of the best systems that we have. Sorry?
Oh, I'm sorry. All Bayes' law does is tell you how to combine information, the optimal way to combine information. And that's a pretty fundamental intelligent thing. But I agree. In fact, I was saying, I think we are agreeing to agree right now that systems approaches are way beyond general intelligence. They're about specific intelligence and specific applications.
And there's also, if I may sort of jump in, there's nothing wrong about disagreeing. As a matter of fact, we are coming together here to disagree because that's how we kind of learn something. But Joanna, to sort of like pick up your point, or sort of like this notion of the limits of, what we could do. Maybe we can shift our conversation to the question to the limits of what we should do. And if I may ask both of you, where would you what's possible and in terms of, what should be done? Maybe starting with you, Max.
Yeah, you dropped for a minute here, I'm afraid. So the question, can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes, absolutely. So the question would be, we've talked about sort of like where are the limits of technology in terms of what's possible. But, when I would like to ask you the question, what are the limits of what we should do? And where would you sort of draw a red line as a computer scientist?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So then we enter, of course, in the sort of discussion on ethics. And so like many other computer scientists, I'm also very worried about the negative impact that AI is having and increasingly can have in the future as it becomes more powerful, in particular in terms of privacy invasion, discrimination, and manipulations, as we have seen. So alongside the technology that we are developing, we need to develop a regulation clearly, and we need to develop ways to certify AI so that in the end, when these tools become available, people are willing to use them and trust them as they become available. So that's and I would say that this level of legislation around it will also give us researchers and technologists sort of a framework to figure out precisely where the limits are in what we should and what we should not develop. Of course, we have our own responsibilities in this as well, but I think it is really important that the politicians and legal people weigh in on this question in what we should and what we should not allow.
So, so I think fundamentally, people have been pointing out that a lot of us early in the AI ethics were kind of making up stuff, and actually the world has achieved consensus on human rights, or some level of consensus, in the last 70 years since we signed up to the UN Statement on Human Rights. So I think that's a good place to start. I think we really need to look at flourishing and dignity of all humans as the core value. I don't think we should trust AI ever. I think it's the wrong metaphor. I think we should be make sure that we can have sufficiently transparent systems that we can go and find out who is doing what to whom, and that who is always going to be a human, either an owner, operator, or the developers of the system, or so those are the options: the developers, the operators, and the owners, right? So we need to know, did they follow best practice? Just like with all software, just like any other manufactured product, they ought to be able to prove that they've checked with due diligence to release a good product. Now, because the system itself, it's not enough to certify it, because all software can be used for good or for bad. We need a set of rules about how people behave. And I do think we will also want to build some new technology to detect when people have been misusing AI. So to notice when there's just, someone's too lucky about, predicting what people are going to do. So to detect the manipulations that we've seen, and which are egregious and do not respect people's freedom of thought and opinion.
I would like to sort of go to the questions that we received from the audience now. And there's a question by Aaron Turner, which I believe is a question that is on a lot of people's minds. I know for a fact that it's on my parents' minds because they always bring it up when we speak about my work. Aaron is asking you, what are your thoughts on AGI? And for those who don't know, the acronym AGI stands for Artificial General Intelligence. And it's essentially the idea that right now, AI is very good at very specific tasks, but only at those. as opposed to us as humans who can process language and we can recognize images and we can do all different kinds of things. So AGI is the idea of coming up with a machine that can do all those things sort of at a human level, and potentially at some point even better than we do it, and that would be called superintelligence. What are your thoughts? Starting with you, Max.
Yeah, so we already discussed it, interestingly, right? So apparently we have slightly different opinions on this. So I think we are quite far away from it. We cannot build these systems currently. So we are very good at building systems that we can feed a huge amount of data and use a huge amount of compute power, like AlphaGo and the image recognition and things like this. But to have common sense in our algorithms, basically, to understand the world, which basically we have to understand the context in which the system operates. So this system needs to understand the world that it's operating in and the context that it's learning things in, and it needs to be able to embed this new concepts that it's learning in this sort of sea, this ocean of background knowledge. Right? To give you an example, if I drive on a road and suddenly something changes in the road because there's road work, I can navigate the situation quite well, but a system that has never seen this currently, will just get completely confused about this. And so this generalization from one context to the next context, current AI is not able to do it. And so then there's the debate, will we be able to reach it by just scaling up, more data and more compute power, or do we need some breakthroughs in the actual AI technology? And I am convinced we need breakthroughs in the AI technology in terms of, for instance, embedding causality and reasoning and generative models and imagination into our AI systems.
Thank you, Max. So Max's assessment is not anytime soon. Joanna, what do you think? When are we going to see AGI and when?
Yeah, so my assessment is different depending how you mean it, either never or we already have it. So the never answer is there is no one magic algorithm where suddenly we're going to have perfect knowledge. That is computationally intractable. It is basically there's something called the map of Germany problem, which is that the perfect map of Germany would be the same size as Germany. So the universe, you're not going to get some algorithm that will suddenly give you all the knowledge in the universe squished into one box. So that's not going to happen. Are we going to make human-like AI? Well, I disagree about this, that there's no common sense. I mean, I can't believe that just in the last few weeks, the improvements that have been made in suggesting text about didn't you actually want to have a different tense in this verb or something. This stuff is happening constantly, and you could definitely call that common sense. Oh, of course you didn't mean to leave that way, right? Where is that common sense coming from? It's coming from experience of human culture. And we upload this stuff. My 2017 paper that showed racism and sexism in standard natural language tools also showed that just by uploading lots of text, you can get common sense factors about the world, which include that people find insects unpleasant, that they find flowers to be pleasant, and that it's just from the way that the meaning of the words of the like programmer or doctor or nurse indicates what proportion of people who hold those jobs are male or female. So all kinds of stuff that we would call common sense are embedded and we're already able to mine using AI. But that's not the same as saying that we're going to have exactly human things built out of metal. It's just there isn't the same kinds of problems. It's not going to be the same kind of thing. But on the final note that you made about superintelligence, every definition, like all the stuff about exponentials, unexponentials, and unintended side effects, that stuff is true. That stuff is logical, it's mathematically correct, and it describes this planet since humans have had writing. So we are the superintelligence. We are the runaway processes. And that's why sustainability is one of the biggest challenges of the next 20 years.
So to summarize, Joanna, we are both apes who understand algorithms, and we are super intelligent. I have a hard time believing it, but we're already at the end of our session, and I would like to wrap it up with an anecdote. I write our AI newsletter called AI Decoded, and in that I regularly interview key political decision makers, thinkers in AI. And a while ago, one of my interviews brought up an analogy, and he said, that today he's often reminded of Jurassic Park, that movie from the 1990s. There's a character in there played by Jeff Goldblum, who's a chaos theory expert. And in one famous scene, you see him talking to the owner of Jurassic Park, that theme park where they used prehistoric DNA to bring dinosaurs back to life. And then he tells him, he says, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could do it, create those dinosaurs, that they didn't stop to think if they should. What I heard, from both of you today in our discussion is that, sometimes to stop and think. And I think we did a little bit of that in this session. So sincerest thank you to Joanna Bryson and Max Welling for what turned out to be an incredibly insightful discussion. Thank you for disagreeing, and back to Nick Vinokour in the studio in Brussels.
Thank you
very much. I agree, that was a very, very interesting discussion. We're going to come back here in just a couple of minutes to discuss whether AI is a cultural matter. What role does culture play in artificial intelligence? We'll be back here in just a couple of minutes to discuss that. Stay tuned, stay connected, send in your questions, and look at the polls. Thanks.